it's Jeff here from discoverdouble-bass.com, which is where you can go to learn all about the double bass with our lessons, courses and our interviews, whether it's classical music, jazz and also some on instrument setup. And today we are at the workshop of one of the bass world's finest makers. We're here in Sweden with Elinore Morris. And yeah, Elinore, thank you so much for inviting us to Sweden to spend time with you. It's a beautiful workshop and a beautiful instrument that you've made as well.
Thank you.
Well, I was hoping that you could share a bit about the optimum string height and fingerboard setup, because we were talking about setup just a moment ago and you said to me, Jeff, it starts with a fingerboard. And that got me thinking, so what exactly do you mean it starts with a fingerboard when it comes to double bass setup? What should people be trying to go for optimum playability and sound?
Well, when I say it starts from the fingerboard, if I'm going to do a setup, I will start here. And the first thing to check is if it's going straight down the instrument or if it's a little bit squawk, and some basses are squawk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the first thing, and you can make a plan with that, so it's not a problem. Then the next thing is the curvature, and often the fingerboard was already there, and that's what you have, and it cannot work very well, and you don't have a great deal to work with. So that's like one of the most important skills for luthiers to be able to correct a fingerboard as best as possible.
So if the fingerboard is too thin, you don't have enough wood to work with to correct the curvature.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about curvature, are we talking in this direction? Or are we talking in this direction?
It's both. It's both. It's complex curves here, and on a violin, the fingerboard is it's like a section of a cylinder. It's got the same radius across the thing, and on a bass, it works. There's different solutions which people have, but I find that I have it as the fingerboard as a section of a cone.
Okay.
So the radius is tighter here than it is here.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And bringing the strings, there's like quite a lot of this fashion in how people want to play. An older bass will often have like a Romberg.
The Romberg bevel at the end here.
Yeah.
And that was a cutaway in the fingerboard to allow the E string to oscillate more with it being a larger string.
Yeah, it was a solution for cellos.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, then there's a whole area to investigate with cello fingerboards, but for bass fingerboards, I don't think that you need to have. I haven't seen a reason to have one.
They don't seem to be present with modern makers.
No,
I can't think of a modern maker who's making instruments with them,
but
I know old basses that have them. So.
Yes, yeah, and I haven't had a player who's requested one.
Oh, that's interesting. And so in terms of the curvature, what are you looking for with the fingerboard? Is there anything else you can tell us to help us work out what we should be aiming for?
And another thing I think is that before you would get a jazz fingerboard and a classical fingerboard, and I don't think there needs to be such a differentiation. I think the fingerboard has to work. It has to work for pizzicato and it has to work for.
I agree.
For bowing, the instrument can change players and it's still got to work.
And I think in my mind, the classical setup and the jazz setup are so similar. It's really just about having a bit more string height to allow the string to oscillate wider when it's under the bow.
Yeah.
But nobody wants a buzzing G. The jazz bass players among us, I personally like a bit of a growl on the low string, but everybody wants a clean kind of G that's ringing out and singing, whether you're jazz or classical, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very different with jazz players. Some jazz players like a very low action. Others they want to groove and like dig in, and they want to have something to grab onto. So it's a very individual thing. So I wouldn't. So I don't think it in terms of a jazz setup and classical setup. It's the setup for the player.
And what about at the fingerboard?
At the nut. Yeah, and another tendency is having because we've moved away from gut strings, they're not as thick. So we're having our nuts they're lower. There's very little gap between.
How would you describe that? Because I've heard it being said as that you should be able to put a business card underneath, or just. I mean, it's a tiny amount, isn't it?
It's a tiny. It's
on the G particularly.
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. I mean, I have like a feeler gauge with like 0.03 millimeters,
Wow.
and all the way up, and then it's tenths or hundredths of millimeter.
Yeah, there's no benefit to having a higher string height. All you're going to have is real discomfort in the player's left hand.
Yeah.
So it's as low as it can go whilst clearing.
Yeah, and a nice smooth transition here.
Oh, that's interesting.
And the strings tend to be a little bit closer together than they were in the past, which obviously makes sense.
Yes.
And players often prefer the feel of the strings being a bit closer together.
That's interesting. So we're looking for a really nice maintained fingerboard, and this isn't something that somebody can do on their own at home. We really need to go to a luthier.
Yeah.
I think another key part is that having an adjustable bridge just helps you go past the point of tolerance where the rattles and buzzes are unbearable, and then back up. For me, if you want to identify where the lowest point is, if that's what your preference is.
I think that the fingerboard has to function well with like the strings as low as they can, like really, really low. If a good fingerboard will still work. Yeah.
And lastly, just to finish off, unless you have any other thoughts, I had one thing that I wanted to mention, that this is actually a GaiaTone fingerboard, and this is a really wonderful thing to see this material being used. And maybe for those at home who aren't aware of GaiaTone and its properties and why you would choose this over a traditional ebony board, what made you pick this material, and what is it?
I met Kathy Riley in the States and saw the first prototypes at the ISB conference last year, and was very impressed. We've had, amongst the bass luthiers, we've had an ongoing conversation about what are we going to do about ebony, because we're not going to have it for so much longer. We're not going to be able to access, and there's all these rules about traveling. We have a travel bass. It can't be in material that is going to be restricted.
So what is GaiaTone? What's it made from? Do you remember?
It's recycled paper.
That's wonderful.
And a natural resin, which it works very well.
And I played this earlier and didn't realise that it was GaiaTone. And I'd be amazed if anybody would notice anything different. If you like ebony, which all of us do, this is exactly the same. And it sounds wonderful. It's got this instrument sounds wonderful, and this fingerboard works perfectly on it. And we've actually done a video as well about the GaiaTone fingerboards, which we'll provide a link for below. But it's a really lovely addition to this wonderful new travel bass. So
I can just
say
this last weekend I put a GaiaTone fingerboard on a player's instrument a few weeks ago, and she wrote to me saying, I do play outside sometimes with our orchestra, and I've always had this problem of that I need to retune the instrument because the weather affects it. And she said, but I didn't have to do it at all. It was completely stable. So there's an advantage which we didn't think of.
Well, it's a fantastic thing, and it's this works so well in this bass. So, Elinore, where can people go and find more about you if they want to learn more about your instruments and maybe come and pay your workshop a visit? Whereabouts can people find you online, and where is your workshop in the world for them to come and see your instruments? Yeah,
well, we're just outside Gothenburg in Sweden, and I have a website which is elinoremorris.com. I've got a Facebook page. And
Well, please join us in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going and share your setup tips and preferences and what you look for in a fingerboard and your string height. So thanks so much for welcoming us today. It's an amazing place here. We've had a great time, and it's been a real joy playing this instrument.